Special thanks to Horizon Therapeutics for sponsoring the Special Fathers Network Dad to Dad podcast, working tirelessly to research, develop, and bring forward medicines for people living with rare and rheumatic diseases. Discover more about Horizon Therapeutics' mission at horizontherapeutics.com.
I think it was Eisenhower. I don't remember, though. But comparison is the thief of joy. Who said that? It was a president. You don't know who it was? I'll think of it later. But comparison is the thief of joy, who I always go back to that statement. And it's very true. Like, once I stopped comparing Grace to normal abled children, that's when I was able to really accept it and move on and be where I'm at right now. Before then, I was always mad, angry, upset, sad, all those emotions you express, right? Because I always wanted her to be something that she was never going to be. And it's not really fair to her for me to think that she would ever be anything else than she would be, right? So once I accepted her for who she is, that's when I became a special needs father.
Hi, and thanks for listening to the Dad to Dad podcast, Fathers Mentoring Fathers of Children with Special Needs, presented by the Special Fathers Network.
The Special Fathers Network is a dad-to-dad mentoring program for fathers raising children with special needs. Through our personalized matching process, new fathers with special needs children connect with mentor fathers in a similar situation. It's a great way for dads to support dads. To find out more, go to 21stcenturydads.org.
And if you're a dad looking for help or would like to offer help, we'd be honored to have you join our closed Facebook group. Please go to facebook.com/groups and search Dad to Dad. I'm thrilled to be talking today with Shayne Gaffney of Windham, New Hampshire, the father of two, a cycling and running coach, as well as a licensed physical therapy assistant. Shayne, thank you for taking the time to do a podcast interview for the Special Fathers Network.
Thank you. Pleasure to be here.
You and your wife, Megan, have been married for 8 years and are the proud parents of two children, Finn, 5, and Grace, 3, who was diagnosed with CytoMegaloVirus, or CMV, a common virus, but when a baby is born with congenital CMV infection, it can result in severe long-term health problems. Let's start with some background. Where did you grow up? Tell me something about your family.
Sure. So I grew up in Wilmington, Massachusetts. It's a town about 20 miles north. No, that's probably too far. Maybe 15 miles north of Boston. Relatively small town. When I lived there, we had one flashing red light when I moved there back in the early 90s. And now it's a pretty hustling, bustling suburb of Boston. So it's interesting how things have changed over a pretty short period of time in this area.
Excellent. So my recollection was your parents were super young when you were born.
Yeah. Super young. Yeah. So my mom and dad were 17 when they had me. And I slept on bunk beds with my mom till I was about 5 years old. I was on the top bunk and she was on the bottom bunk in my grandmother's house. So it's pretty interesting dynamic there for sure. But yeah, it's very young when they had me.
Okay. And I also remember that you mentioned you had some half brothers and half sisters.
I do. So my mother married my stepfather, probably 20 years ago now, I want to say. 28 years ago, somewhere in that range. And yes, they had 2 more boys who were my half brothers, and my dad got remarried about the same time, and they had 2 girls, so my half sisters. So I have 2 and 2.
Excellent. And you're the oldest, obviously.
I am the oldest. Yeah, I'm the oldest by about 10 years. Yeah.
Okay. So I'm sort of curious to know, when you were growing up, did you have more of a relationship with your dad or your stepdad?
It's interesting. I didn't really have a relationship with either, strangely enough. I spent weeks with my grandmother. My grandmother was the one that really raised me, I would say. So I spent weeks with my grandmother and my mom, and then I spent weekends with my dad. So I saw my dad, twice a week, once a week-ish, and then my stepfather, I saw him more frequently. But relationship was never strong with either. It's gotten better recently, but it was a real struggle when I was growing up under that roof for sure.
Yeah, it seems like it was a less traditional upbringing, if I could refer to it as such.
Yeah, I felt like I was in the middle of 2 families and just kind of cycling between the 2. That's how I've always felt. I don't feel like that anymore because I'm older with my own family. But yeah, when I was growing up, I always felt like I wasn't really a part of either. I was just kind of in between the 2, bouncing back and forth from house to house.
Yeah, well, I understand what you're saying, and I can relate just a little bit in that my parents divorced when I was 6, my younger brother was 5, and I spent a lot more time with my mom and my maternal grandparents as a result. And, it's not good or bad, it's just the reality of the situation. And,
Yeah.
sometimes somebody steps in. I was very fortunate to have my maternal grandfather step in and become that father figure in my life. And, everybody's situation is a little bit different. It's the whole reason that we started the 21st Century Dads Foundation was to address this issue of father absence, and more specifically, with dads raising kids with special needs. So thanks for sharing. So I'm sort of curious to know, what did your dad do for a living?
My dad is an interesting cat. He worked developing teeth, like molds for teeth. So it's very hard to explain, but he would get a picture of somebody's mouth from the dentist, and then he would turn that picture into, back in the day, like an old plaster, and then he would pour resin over the plaster to make a negative, and then they would form whatever, a bridge or a gold tooth in some cases over that bridge. And now he services wheelchairs and special needs equipment for people in wheelchairs or those kinds of needs, which is kind of interesting too. So he's kind of been a little bit of a jack of all trades.
Yeah, very interesting. Thank you. And I know you've made reference to your dad a little bit, but how would you characterize your relationship with him? Maybe reflecting on what it was and then how it's evolved.
What it was weekends mostly. And recently, since I've had kids, I would say the bond between us has gotten a lot stronger because he's a proud grandfather of my 2 kids. So yeah, it's definitely gotten stronger, and our relationship has, I think, improved as a result of that. But historically, yeah, it was kind of like we would see each other occasionally, once every few months or so. Especially when I was working, when I had a car too, it was a pretty rare instance when we saw each other. And then obviously holidays and maybe the occasional phone call, text here and there, but nothing too strong, I would say.
Yeah, well, thanks for being so open and authentic about it. And I know that grandchildren do have an effect on people. As a young grandfather myself, all of a sudden the people that were most important on the planet, your children, become sort of like the second most important people on the planet. And then all of a sudden these grandchildren, take center stage, if you will.
Sure.
So it is a beautiful thing. And I'm hoping that as a result, your relationship with your dad will continue to strengthen and that he'll play a meaningful role in your children's lives as well. So.
Yeah, same here. I wish that too.
Speaking of grandparents, I'm wondering what, if any, role your grandfathers played, first on your dad and then on your mom's side.
So my mom's dad was kind of, my mom's parents are also divorced too. So it's another interesting dynamic there. So I saw him occasionally. He had a pool. So I remember going to his pool a lot in the summers and spending time with him then. But otherwise, that's pretty much it. I don't have a lot of memories with him. And they went through an estranged period for, probably 5 or 10 years. So he kind of fell out of the picture for that case. And then my dad's dad, his parents are married and they have a great relationship. I would see him a lot more frequently than my mom's dad, especially where Christmas or Thanksgiving or Easter, like those holidays, they would always host. So I have a lot of good memories with that house with them for sure.
Thanks for sharing. So switching to education, my recollection was you got a BA in health science and professional development and advanced patient care from Grand Canyon University. I'm wondering, once you got your degree, where did you feel like your career was pointing?
Well, I got an associate's degree in physical therapy from North Shore. That was my first degree. And then I started to work as a PT assistant. And I wanted to go in for my master's and eventually my doctorate in physical therapy. So the BS was it's a BS in health science, and the BS was the next step in there. But if I back up a little bit, so I was a pretty decent track athlete, and I got into UMass Lowell on a scholarship. But I needed a signature from one of my parents to get the loan to pay for schooling, and they wouldn't sign it for me. And that was really, I would say, when everything hit the fan and blew up with that relationship at that point, because I worked really hard to get that. To get in shape, but also get into school, get money off, all that kind of stuff. And they just wouldn't sign the loan for me for whatever reason. So then I moved out, and then I lived in my girlfriend at the time was my wife now in her dorm room for about a year. People thought I went to school there, but I didn't. I was just crashing in her dorm room every night. And I worked at Market Basket at the time, and I put myself through school at community college. So I went to PTA for the North Shore because it was cheap and I could pay for it on my own accord. I worked nights and weekends to do that in school during the day. And then Grand Canyon University was my next step in the BS in health science, because that was also weekends and nights. So I could work full-time days as a PTA, make decent money, and then pay for school nights and weekends at Grand Canyon University. Then I started to coach, which we'll probably get to at some point too. And it kind of fell off my radar at that point. And it was also, schooling is, as you know, extremely expensive. And the juice has to be worth the squeeze in a way. And I felt like if I went to school for another 3 years, I would spend $80,000 and only make $20,000 more a year. So the juice wasn't really worth the squeeze in my case, I think.
Yeah, well, thanks for sharing that. So you're athletic, right? That's what I heard you say. And I know that you've gone into the coaching business, coaching cyclists and runners. So how is that transition?
Great. Honestly, I've always felt a strong urge to help people, whether that's from a rehab perspective or goal setting, reaching their goals, improving them as a human. I think it's important for me to do, because I started running track just to get out of my house and deal with my own problems with my family, right? So I've always felt like endurance especially was a form of this like active meditation, what I would call it, because you have to be present in what you're doing, and you can't have any extrinsic like noise. And I really appreciated that and craved that the first time I did a 5K. I remember like that was the most painful and hard thing I've ever done. But I've also never felt as good as I do in my entire life after doing a 5K for the first time, right? So that kind of grew and blossomed from there. So coaching was a perfect mixture of my background in knowledge and healthcare and physiology, biology, blah, 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 with the marriage of psychology, helping people work through their problems, improve as athletes, improve as people. And I fell in love with it head over heels. And yeah, I've been fortunate to be a full-time coach this is my 5th year now as a full-time coach. So I've been fortunate to do that for sure.
So triathletes, runners, what type of people are you coaching?
Mostly cyclists, actually. I would say mostly master's age, which is like 40 plus. Post kids, pre-grandkids, they have some money to burn on a coach and they have some time to burn on a coach, right? That tends to be my bread and butter. Some juniors, but not too many, excuse me. And I'm the occasional triathlete, but I work with the bike leg for the triathletes. I don't work with swimming typically, aside from like form work or whatever. And then runners, very rarely, mostly cyclists. That's kind of my bread and butter.
Okay. Well, thanks for sharing. I consider myself a triathlete, but not like an athlete. It's more like I'm athletic, right? Just I enjoy the workouts, and I like the variety of swimming, biking, and running.
Yeah.
And I think it was about 6 years ago, after our 5th child, our baby, went off to college, I felt like God was talking to me. And what I heard was, you should do a cross-country bicycle ride. And I'm like, oh, no, you've got the wrong guy. I don't even own a bike. You could ride across the country, and I can count on one hand with 4 fingers left over the number of times I rode like 100 miles in one day. Like a century ride is like a bucket list, for some people.
For sure.
And I couldn't shake the idea. So I started talking to people that I knew were cyclists and got some advice, do this, don't do that. And then one thing led to the next. I ended up buying a bike, put a training schedule together, I put a crew together, I put a schedule together for all 21 days, which it turned out to be, riding from Santa Monica to Chicago and averaging 112 miles a day for 21 days in a row. And I lived to tell the story, right? I was 54 years old at the time. So what you were talking about with, masters, that's a very friendly phrase for people that are, if not over the hill, getting to the hill. And like you said, if, you've raised your kids, you don't have the expense of, tuition and things like that. So,
right.
You've got a little extra disposable income, so you might be able to afford somebody to assist you, with your training and help you, focus on things that you might not be totally up to speed on, or a blind spot or something like that. And the most important thing that I learned along the way is that you want to stay healthy and injury-free, right? So that you can do what you've set out to do, right? Which, a lot of people get sidelined from an injury, or if they get sick, they get off their training schedule and they're just not able to be at the fitness level that they need to come, race day, if you will. And I've never really thought of myself as a person who's competitive when it comes to doing running or cycling or swimming, but you're really competing with yourself,
Yes.
right? To, be the best person you can be. And, if you've set a goal, it doesn't have to be, riding 2,300 plus miles in 3 weeks like I did, but, whatever your goal is, it could be just to be in better shape, right?
Yeah.
Or to do, like you said, do a 5K, do a 10K, do a half marathon, ride a certain distance, right? That you weren't capable of doing, when you first set out to do something. And there's a sense of, satisfaction, a sense of accomplishment. You develop some confidence, in yourself in one area of your life, which hopefully carries over to other aspects of your life. So I totally get, what you're referring to. And it's so inspiring, right? To be able to help somebody, attain a goal that they thought that, was way out of line with what their ability would be, and the sense of satisfaction they get. And then now they can set some new goals, right? They can go on to do bigger and better things, if you will. So
for sure. Yeah, I love it. And even going back to the days where I was practicing, like teaching somebody how to walk again after a stroke, or, somebody that breaks their arm and they're a pitcher, telling them to throw a ball again, like just doing those things, they were so inspirational and also very grounding for me too, where it gave me a lot of respect for what my body can do and what others might not be able to do, not under their own accord, right? So it gave me a good appreciation for my life and, all the things that I can do and I've worked hard for. So it's a really good thing to have that. The word just escaped me. It's a really big word. I can't remember, but the word is escaping now. But when you see what you can do because somebody else can, I can't remember what the word is called right now, unfortunately, but you know what I mean.
You live vicariously.
Maybe vicariously. That might be the word. Yeah, that's a pretty big word for me. So vicarious at the end.
So I'm sort of curious to know, how did you and Megan meet?
We met at the Wilmington 4th of July Carnival, the big, huge to-do for any school-age child in Wilmington, Massachusetts, at least back in my day, back in the early to mid-90s. Yeah, so we met at the carnival in 8th grade. Sounds super cliche, super cheesy, but, I knew that she was the girl for me as soon as I saw her. And I was fortunate to be pretty stubborn and pretty, I don't want to say harassing, but she definitely was like, okay, I think you've talked to me enough. Let's see if this could work. And fortunately it did. And we have 2 beautiful kids, got married 2008. So no, sorry, 2012. And yeah, it's been great ever since then.
That's awesome. Thanks for sharing. Well, let's talk about special needs first on a personal basis and then beyond. So I'm sort of curious to know, before Grace's diagnosis, did you or Megan have any real exposure to the world of special needs?
I did through my patients I worked with, but that was at a professional level, not on a personal level. No, we were fortunate to not have anybody in my family or even extended family with any special needs.
Okay. So what is Grace's diagnosis and how did that diagnosis come about?
Grace's diagnosis, well, she has many diagnoses, but her primary diagnosis is CMV, or CytoMegaloVirus, which is a big honking word, which is why we call it CMV and not CytoMegaloVirus. And we found out that she was CMV positive at day 3 of life. So we were very fortunate to be at Winchester Hospital right outside of Boston. And Boston Children's Hospital staff were there working in the labor and delivery room. And they were able to recognize the signs and symptoms of CMV as soon as Grace came out, which are, microcephaly, or also called small head. She was covered in this blueberry rash, or called petechiae, which is another sign. And then they ran some tests which revealed she had jaundice and just really high liver values. So with all those, with those 3 initial diagnoses, they tested her urine for CMV, which came back positive. And then they did a PCR test following that, which also came back positive. So we found out day 3 that she was CMV positive.
So my understanding is that this is a very common virus that affects, nearly 50% of the population, but it's something that they come in contact with throughout their life as opposed to something that's congenital. And what I think I've heard you described is she was born with this, right? And that's where the challenge comes, right?
Right.
Is when somebody has congenital CMV. So do you have any sense for what the incidence of that is in society? 1 out of whatever number of babies that are born.
1 in 200 babies are born with congenital CMV. And then of those babies, 1 in 5 will have long-term health problems as a result of it.
Wow. So surprising that it's so common. The virus itself is so common. And while it doesn't seem like a lot of babies, 1 out of 200, that's still a pretty consequential number of babies that are born with the condition. And it does not seem that well known, at least by my understanding. Somebody who's been immersed in the world of special needs, not just the typical special needs like autism and Down syndrome and cerebral palsy, but many of the 7,000 plus rare genetic disorders. And I'm wondering, why do you think that is?
That's a great question. And I don't really know, honestly, why that is the case, but there's definitely a dichotomy between awareness and, actual cases. So like the statistic I always think back on is like 91% of women don't know about CMV. So like that's a huge number. And like I said, it's 1 in 200 babies, 1 in 5 have long-term health problems, and it's the number one cause of non-genetic hearing loss in the world right now. And that's also the main symptom that comes out of CMV is hearing loss. But I mean, we've never heard about CMV in our prenatal appointments from OBs or from anybody. And I've interviewed a few OBs, and I always heard the same thing, like, we don't educate our patients on it because there's no modality we can do for CMV. So I think an ounce of prevention is worth a pound of cure, right? And I think if the OBs and those primary people that take care of pregnant women, if they educated them on CMV, I think that would be a really huge benefit. Because, they educate you on the cat litter thing. I can't remember what it's called. But I think that's such a rare thing. And like Zika virus, same thing. Like we hear about Zika, it's such a rarity thing, but we don't hear anything about CMV. So it's interesting how they educate on some pretty rare viruses and diseases, but don't educate on literally the most common virus that you can get if you're pregnant.
Yeah, that's interesting. Is it the type of thing that can be tested in vitro? So it's like one of those battery of, tests that they do, to, identify some of the, like you said, more common challenges that might take place in a pregnancy.
They can't test for it in vitro, but I don't believe I don't believe the accuracy is recognized fully. So they can test for it, but I don't think what am I trying to say here? I don't think it's a typical course of action that they would do.
Okay. So you get this diagnosis within just the first couple weeks of Grace's birth. And what were the symptoms, right? What were some of the things that were being diagnosed early on?
Super early on was obviously jaundice. So we had a big issue with jaundice. She had extremely low blood platelets. So we actually had to have 2 blood transfusions conducted because of her platelet count was so low. So it was pretty touch and go for the first couple of weeks when we were in the NICU. And then after that, she had an MRI done on her brain, which revealed pretty significant just brain damage and lack of formation and a lot of structures, especially on her visual cortex, which is the back of her brain. And from there, we did hearing, she failed her hearing tests in the labor and delivery room. And then we had a follow-up called an A-B test, or it's basically if the brainstem will conduct nerve impulses, and she failed that as well. So that revealed that she was profoundly deaf bilaterally. And then we went to the eye doctor, and she had esotropia, which is actually fairly common. It's just she has a lazy eye on one side. But because of her brain damage, they thought that she wouldn't be able to actually, she could see, but what she actually perceived may not be 100% accurate, just because that's where the brain perceives what you're seeing. Cerebral palsy was diagnosed soon after that. And yeah, that was the first 2 months. So that was a
Wow.
pretty heavy 2 months.
I can only imagine.
We had like 25 visits or something the first 2 months. It was a lot.
Well, it's not lost on me that you have an older child, right? So you're young parents, Finn's, 2-ish.
Yep.
While all this is coming down, and it just seems like all of a sudden you're scrambling, right? You went from having your second child. Oh, we've got a boy, we've got a girl. There's a lot of good things going on, and then you get thrown this dramatic curveball, right? That how could you possibly be prepared for? And I'm wondering if you can reflect back to that first 6 months or so. What were some of the fears that you and Megan could remember?
Well, I think the main one was, would Grace live through the night? That was a pretty common fear, and it's a pretty heavy thing to say now, even still, but it's true. Like, she was very, very sick and just very frail for the first 6 months to a year. And yeah, like you said, I mean, we had a 2-year-old who was crazy. He still is a little crazy, but we love him. No, just kidding. And yeah, I think the interesting, which you kind of brought up, was we weren't prepared for it. So you go in, everybody's telling you, oh, everything is going great. She's going to be a healthy girl. You should be excited, blah, blah, blah. And, the same, like the absolute 180 from when Finn was born, which is everything is balloons, everything is congratulatory, everything is what's he going to do for a living when he grows up? Like everything is like hope, right? Grace is born, everything is, we have to get this test done, we have to do this blood draw, we have to do A, B, and C, and D. Is she going to live through the day? We don't really know. What's her like level of function going to look like? So that hopeful balloon was popped as soon as she was born. And it's just an interesting thing where you walk by, I think I wrote this in a blog post one time, but you walk by other patient rooms to get to the NICU, and healthy babies, balloons, clapping, celebratory, everything is like happy, hunky-dory, right? And you walk into the NICU and everything is crying. There's buzzers going off. There's like just this insane environment. And then you walk out of the NICU and it's the same thing, like everything is hunky-dory, everybody's happy again. So I really struggled with that, especially the first 6 months. Is like, nobody understands what I'm going through, and CMV is such a rare thing and nobody talks about. So who can I talk to about this? And like, who can I go to for answers? And who can I confide in about this? So it was a really interesting 6 months time period for sure.
Yeah, well, what I think I heard you saying is that, your expectations are super high and elevated going into the delivery. And then all of a sudden, like the way you described it, is that balloon of hope gets popped. And all of a sudden you're in a surreal experience, right? Where a lot of families around are celebratory and everything is, going as expected. And then there's this small number, a small percentage of the families that end up in the NICU with super preemies or the one-off type experiences, which you're aware of, I guess, generally, but you think, well, the probability is so small, it's not likely. And all of a sudden you're there, right? And then, it's in uncharted territory, like you were describing. And I'm wondering if there was some meaningful advice that you got early on that you can identify that helped you, Megan, sort of put this all in perspective and started to chart the path that you find yourself on now.
Oh, boy, that's a good question. I can't say we got any real positive news or advice those first 6 months, honestly. It was basically meeting new people and hearing more bad news about Grace's diagnosis or Grace's overall outlook, or, what she's going to be able to do. Like, she's not going to be able to walk, not going to be able to talk. She'll be a vegetable, blah, blah, blah. All those things you don't want to hear as a parent. Yeah. And I would say, for me, I've always felt, I guess, empowered by, I don't want to say disparity, but I guess it is disparity. Like, you got dealt a really crummy hand. So what can you do to get yourself out of it? And how can you self-motivate? I hate the word, like, pull yourself up by your bootstraps, but those kind of like cliche sayings, but it's kind of true. Like, what can I do now to help me get out of my hole, but also bring my family with me, kind of a thing. So I remember I actually signed up for the New York City Marathon, which was on day 5 in the NICU. I signed up for the New York City Marathon because the National CMV Foundation had a team going there. So I was like, well, there's my outlet to start to kind of pull myself out of my funk, I guess, right? I didn't answer your question, but I guess that's kind of how I did it. I didn't really get advice. I just pulled myself up and went for it. And I'm still doing that today, obviously.
Yeah, well, if I can paraphrase what you've said, nothing comes to mind as far as getting specific advice. But it sounded like you were already getting plugged into the CMV community, right? You were aware that the CMV community existed, right? You said, I signed up for the New York City Marathon because they had a team, right? And maybe there wasn't any specific advice, but what I hear you saying is that there's this group of people, right, that were drawing attention to doing something they like to do, which is running. And obviously you could relate to that as somebody who's a coach, helping other people accomplish their own goals. And you found yourself, trying to chart your own path, right? Maybe it wasn't specific advice, but you're getting plugged into a group of like-minded people, right? People that were, I guess, what you become, which is an advocate for CMV, as the time has gone by. And were there some important decisions that you and Megan made as young parents, finding yourself immersed in this CMV world that you can look back on and say, oh yeah, those were good decisions, right? Those were sort of turning points, if you want to call it that.
If anything, the best decision was to do everything as a team and really just stick together. So these kinds of things can drive families apart just as much as they can bring people closer together. And I think that was a decision I made very early on. Was I didn't want this to be, I knew this was going to be really, really challenging and really stressful and a lot of hard work, but I wanted to keep everybody together and keep them as close as possible. So it was a really hard decision I made in the beginning, but it's one of the best decisions I've made. And even today, we're going into her school because she's going to start preschool soon. So we're going into school today to do her first IEP meeting in 2 hours, actually. So even then, like we've been through this since day one together. So we know exactly what each other would say. We've been to all her appointments, all of her surgeries. So it's been a nice team approach to dealing with her diagnosis.
That's fabulous. Well, I think it probably has something to do with your own upbringing, right? And the sort of fractured nature of, your own upbringing and wanting to maintain some stability and chart a different path for your family. At least
yes,
it seems clear to me, right? Because I think that's one of the things we have in common, which is I don't want that for my kids, right? That was just such an unstable, unpredictable environment. And if there's anything I can do, right, to be the leader in my family and do whatever it takes to pull it together, right? That's what I hear you saying. And there's one of the other dads in the network. There's a lot of other dads in the network, but one that comes to mind, and his name is Warren Rustan. And this is like a leader amongst leaders. And I'm going to deputize you to listen to his podcast interview.
Great.
And one of the favorite phrases that I've heard him say often is referring to his family, we do hard things.
Yeah.
Right. And, accepting that, right? Life is not easy. It's not meant to be easy. And it's those hard things, those more challenging circumstances that really shape who you are, shape your character, right? When you look back on it. And, it's like what you do from a coaching standpoint, right? You're helping people deal with hard things, right? Physically painful things and mentally challenging situations, right? And you're showing them ways to deal with that, right? Putting the pain into perspective and, what is it you can do from a mental perspective, right? To get a couple steps further, get the next mile, right? Get to the, finish line. And these are metaphors for life, right? What you do for a living. And if you can apply some of those same principles to your own situation, right? You're going to be better off, right? This is not rocket science, right? We're not sending a man to the moon, for God's sakes. Basic day-to-day stuff, right? That we all have challenges, right? And, it does take some physical fitness, right? So you can bring your A game every day.
Yep.
And it takes mental fitness, right? So that you don't get fatigued, right? That you don't get down or get distracted or start to have a pity party for yourself, right? What does that do, right? All that time and energy is,
not well spent. So
I agree.
anyway, I really admire you and Megan for, charting the path that you have. And at the risk of focusing on the negative, I'm wondering what some of the bigger challenges that you've faced have been.
One really big one comes to mind, which is Grace's hearing loss. So she was born profoundly deaf, as I covered before. So we had two choices. We could either focus on sign language with the use of hearing aids, which we tried, or we could do cochlear implants. But problem is cochlear implants, you basically sever the auditory nerve. So she's never going to hear ever again, aside from cochlear implants. And she did have some hearing with hearing aids. So it's probably the biggest challenge and the biggest decision we made was to do cochlear implants. And we made that decision simply because she has pretty bad cerebral palsy. So she can't use her hands well because they're always in that kind of like a claw formation. So she really couldn't ever sign well enough to communicate with us. Well, she can communicate with us, that's a lie, to communicate with people externally from her family. So we decided to do the route of cochlear implants and try to focus on hearing and auditory input. And then maybe she could use a tablet for external, speaking or even talk someday, who knows, right? Mm-hmm. So that's probably the hardest decision we had to make was that one.
And at what age was that?
It was interesting. COVID came and pushed it up at 6 months. So it was supposed to be at about 1 year, like 14 months or so. And then she was scheduled for April of 2020. And we all know what happened in April of 2020. So she got pushed to July or not, actually August of 2020. So she was about 2 when she had them done.
Okay. And has it been successful?
Procedure was great. Yep. Mapping went well for the implants. Our struggle now is her wear time is pretty low because the magnets have to stay in contact with the back of her head. And she has pretty poor head control from her cerebral palsy. And she's always sitting or laying down. So she's always rubbing her head against the surface she's on and they just always pop off. So we kind of like solved one major problem and created another one at the same time. But we're working through that as well to try to like, what can we do to keep her cochlear implants on? So if your audience has any suggestions, please write to me because I don't know what else I can do at this point to keep them on her head.
Okay, I'll make a note of that. So I'm sort of curious to know what impact Grace's situations had on her older brother, Finn, your marriage, or your extended family for that matter.
Yeah, I would say, honestly, it sounds strange, but it's been a positive impact, I would say. Finn is 5, so Finn is just now starting to, I think, understand his sister is different, but not in a bad way. I think different in a good way, and it'll give him great perspective and great awareness and hopefully just real life education that some people don't get dealt the best hand, right? But we can always improve and do what we can with those hands. And as far as the marriage, like I said, the marriage has become stronger and it's brought us closer together. And, like I said, from the beginning of the interview, it's improved my relationship with my dad, with my mom, which is obviously a blessing as well. And I would say, because Grace is so special and she does require a lot of work, it takes a village. Another saying, I've said a lot of sayings today, I'm sorry, but it does take a village. And I think my village has become larger and also stronger as a result of that. So I would say it's been a very positive thing.
Yeah, well, I'm so pleased to hear that. And nobody gets to where they are on their own, right? We like to think we have accomplished something, by ourselves, but we're all a product of the experiences, including the people that have played roles in our lives. And there's a lot of role models. That's what I think of. We think of the good role models, right? The ones we emulate, the ones we want to be more like. But, we also learn from, role models that, we're trying to do things differently from, right? Optimally learn vicariously through those role models, right? So that we're not making some of the same mistakes that others made, right? And we're hopefully, in a better position as a result of that as well.
For sure.
Thinking about that, I'm wondering what organizations come to mind that have played an important role in your family's life, the last couple of years?
I would say Easter Seals has probably been the number one organization, and that's who Grace gets all her services through. So her occupational therapy, her physical therapy, her hearing therapy, all those really, really important EI stuff, she gets all those from Easter Seals. So that's probably the number one organization for her. And for me, it's probably been the National CME Foundation, as you said. That was where I found my community. That was where I found people I could resonate with and just learn from parents who have been in my shoes before. Yeah, so I'd say those two are probably the most important organizations I found.
So I think of you as a CMV advocate. I don't know if that is on a business card that you have, but you've become an advocate as a result of your own life experience. And I'm wondering, do you see yourself as an advocate? And if so, what do you see your role as?
Yeah, I would say I'm happy to be an advocate for CMV. And I think I have a few roles. Obviously, the most important one is being a dad to a CMV affected child. Also being hopefully a member of the community to help other parents in their journeys and be a sounding board for other dads. And then I'm also working with, companies like Moderna, Dr. Panther. And then we also have actually a bill in Massachusetts, which is in the Public Health Committee now, which is going to ideally mandate prenatal education and universal screening for newborns in Massachusetts. So I'm trying to do everything I possibly can to get the word out, as well as help reduce infection rates and prepare parents if they do have a baby with CMV in the future, just so people don't have to go what I went through with Grace and my family. So yeah, I would say I have a pretty long business card at this point, but I love everything I do for this community and for this virus. Honestly, I wouldn't change it. I wouldn't change a thing.
Yeah, well, what I really admire about you, Shayne, is that what you've just expressed, and in the order that you expressed it, I'm a dad first, right? That's my primary responsibility. You emphasize what you do professionally, and what comes to mind as an advocate is that you want to help other parents, even though this has just been an experience that you've had over the last few years. And that part of that is aligning with companies like Moderna and helping advance, if it's meant to be, finding a vaccine. And then the broader message, which is, hey, there's something we could or should be doing in the medical community so that better testing takes place, right? So people, are on top of things at an earlier point in time, that they don't get blindsided, perhaps like you and Megan did. And I'm hoping that as a result, the life that Grace is leading, which is one that you had anticipated before her birth, what you're doing as an advocate is a testimony, right? It's part of Grace's legacy, right?
Right.
And I hope that you'll find as she gets older that she's going to impact the world in a more profound way, perhaps than she would have if she was just another typical kid.
She already has, honestly. I'm here talking to you because she was born, right? If she wasn't born, I would be typing at a computer, looking at a computer screen, or at my day job, right? I wouldn't be doing this really, really super important work. So she already has, and I think she'll continue to, honestly. So yeah, and honestly, right back at you too, like what you do for the podcasts, for the foundation, what you've done to kind of bring a voice to dads and bring the community of dads together is super profound and I think super important. So thank you for what you do as well.
Yeah, well, thank you. So, in our world, in the world of the Special Fathers Network, we have over 500 dads who've agreed to be mentor fathers to the younger dads. And, here you're talking like a mentor father, right? And your oldest child is 5.
Yeah.
And, and with all due respect, you do have a lot to share. Is there any specific advice other than how to keep these cochlear implants from, getting rubbed off? Any advice that you can think of that you and Megan would be looking for at this point in time?
We're at the precipice of school, right? Like I said, we're literally 2 hours away from her first IEP meeting at the school. So that's a gigantic milestone we haven't even crossed yet. So yeah, that's kind of where we're at. I would say for us is like, how can we navigate the IEP process? How can we navigate schools? Like, what does that even look like? Right? We have no idea what that is. So that's at front of mind right now for sure. And otherwise, yeah, more like just not letting the demons win, I guess, right? Like staying positive, staying focused, I always go back to the quote. I think it was Eisenhower. I don't remember though, but comparison is the thief of joy. Who said that? It was a president. You don't know who it was. I'll think of it later. But comparison is a thief of joy, who I always go back to that statement. And it's very true. Like once I stopped comparing Grace to normal abled children, that's when I was able to really like accept it and move on and be where I'm at right now. Before then, I was always mad, angry, upset, sad, all those emotions you express, right? Because I always wanted her to be something that she was never going to be. And it's not really fair to her for me to think that she would ever be anything else than she would be, right? So once I accepted her for who she is, that's when I became a special needs father, right? Because Grace was always who I wanted her to be and who she was going to be. It just took me a little bit to accept her for who she was.
Yeah, well, very well stated. And like you underscored, once you've accepted her for who she is, then everything else transpires from there, right?
Yep.
And I think the frustration and the anger and the anxiety all come from trying to reconcile that, right? You know, where I anticipated being and where I find myself. And,
right.
You know, it's not a straight line, right? It's a slippery slope for many people. And I dare say that some people just never get there, right? They just cannot put their minds around it for whatever reason. So,
sure.
You know, you, I think, are uniquely qualified to be the parents that you are. And, you know, Grace is the primary beneficiary. And, you know, actually, the world's going to be a beneficiary of your experience as well. So any specific advice that you can offer another parent? Now, not receiving, but giving or offering advice to another parent that finds himself in this surreal world that you've described?
Yeah, I mean, I think I just gave it, right? Comparison is the thief of joy, I would say. And I would say try to accept, which is obviously like, it's so easy to say, right? And it's so hard to do, if not impossible to do with some people, but accept your kids for who they are. That's the most important thing I think you could do as a parent. Even if they're normally able, they're special needs, just accept them for who they are. That's what people want to do.
Excellent. So why is it that you've agreed to be part of the Special Fathers Network?
I think because the mission is important to me, and I resonate with it, which is helping others through hard times, educating, being a mentor, being a mentee, whatever you want to call it, right? Being a human. I think that's what's important to me. So it was a pretty simple, no-brainer decision.
Well, we're thrilled to have you. Thank you for being involved. Let's give a special shout out to Luann Sedano and our other friends at New Line Media for helping connect us.
Yes.
If somebody wants to learn more about CMV or to contact you, how would they go about doing that?
They can contact me at my personal email is fine. So it's my last name, period, and then my first name @gmail.com. And then they can learn more by visiting nowiknowcmv.com, as well as the National CMV Foundation. Those are two great websites to visit.
We'll be sure to include that in the show notes. It'll make it as easy as possible for people to follow up. Shayne, thank you for taking the time and many insights. As a reminder, Shayne is just one of the individuals who's part of the Special Fathers Network, a mentoring program for fathers raising a child with special needs. If you'd like to be a mentor father or are seeking advice from a mentor father with a similar situation to your own, please go to 21stCenturyDads.org. Thank you for listening to the latest episode of the Special Fathers Network Dad to Dad podcast. I hope you enjoyed the conversation as much as I did. As you probably know, the 21st Century Dads Foundation is a 501c3 not-for-profit organization, which means we need your help to keep our content free to all concerned. Would you please consider making a tax-deductible contribution? I would really appreciate your support. Shayne, thanks again.
Thank you for your time.
And thank you for listening to the Special Fathers Network Dad to Dad podcast. The Special Fathers Network is a dad-to-dad mentoring program for fathers raising children with special needs. Through our personalized matching process, new fathers with special needs children match up with mentor fathers in a similar situation. It's a great way for dads to support other dads. To find out more, go to 21stCenturyDads.org.
And if you're a dad looking for help or would like to offer help, we would be honored to have you join our closed Facebook group. Please go to facebook.com/groups and search Dad to Dad. Also, please be sure to register for the Special Fathers Network bi-weekly Zoom calls held on the first and third Tuesdays of every month. Lastly, we're always looking to share interesting stories. If you'd like to share your story or know of a compelling story, please send an email to david@21stcenturydads.org.
The Special Fathers Network Dad to Dad podcast was produced by me, Tom Couch. Thanks again to Horizon Therapeutics, who believe that science and compassion must work together to transform lives. That's why they work tirelessly to research, develop, and bring forward medicines for people living with rare and rheumatic diseases. Discover more about Horizon Therapeutics at horizontherapeutics.com.